My fiancé disappeared weeks before the wedding, then tried to win me back, and then My name's Ethan, and for a while, I thought I was one of the luckiest guys around. I'd been dating Rachel for nearly 3 years, and things were going great. Or at least, I thought they were. She was everything I wanted in a partner. Bright, funny, and magnetic in a way that made people gravitate toward her. Being with her felt effortless, like we were building something solid together. That's why, about a year ago, I decided to propose. We were at her favorite spot in the Smoky Mountains, on a quiet hiking trail overlooking the valleys. She said yes, and just like that, we were engaged. It felt like the beginning of a new chapter, one that promised happiness, stability, and maybe even a family someday. We started planning a June wedding, complete with an outdoor ceremony and a string quartet, the kind of event Rachel had been dreaming about since she was a teenager. But here's the thing about life. Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball you never saw coming. The first sign that something was off came out of nowhere. Rachel and I had been up late one night, flipping through color palettes for the wedding. She was laughing at how indecisive I was about whether the napkins should be sage or forest green, like it mattered. Then, out of the blue, she sighed and said, "I think I need to visit home for a bit." "Home?" I asked, caught off guard. She nodded. "Yeah, Asheville. I haven't seen my sister in months, and with the wedding stuff, I don't know. I feel like I need a break." At the time, it didn't strike me as strange. Rachel was close with her family, and she always talked about how much she missed her sister, Lauren, who still lived in their old neighborhood. I figured a trip would do her some good. Planning a wedding can be stressful, right? So, I didn't question it. "When are you thinking of going?" I asked. "Next week, maybe for a couple of weeks," she replied, her tone casual. "It'll give me a chance to clear my head, spend some time with Lauren, and reset a little before things get crazier." I agreed without hesitation. We kissed goodnight, and that was that. The morning she left, I helped her pack the car. She gave me a quick kiss, promised to call when she arrived, and then drove off. I stood in the driveway, watching her taillights disappear down the road, thinking about how much I'd miss her while she was gone. Little did I know, that kiss would be the last moment that felt normal between us. At first, everything seemed fine. She texted me when she got to Asheville, letting me know she made it safely. That night, we talked on the phone, and she told me about her plans to go hiking with Lauren and visit some of their favorite spots from childhood. Her voice sounded warm, familiar, like the Rachel I knew. But the next day, things began to shift. I sent her a text mid-morning, just a simple "hope you're having a good day" message. Hours passed with no reply. That wasn't like Rachel. She was usually glued to her phone. I tried not to overthink it. Maybe she was busy with her sister. By evening, I still hadn't heard back, so I called. The call went straight to voicemail. The next day was more of the same. I sent another message, trying not to come across as needy. "Hey, just checking in. How's it going over there?" Again, nothing. A cold knot of worry started forming in my stomach, but I told myself I was being dramatic. She was probably just caught up in family time. When she finally called on the third day, I almost didn't answer out of frustration. But as soon as I picked up, her tone was different, hesitant, almost guilty. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep things light. "Thought you forgot about me." She gave a nervous laugh. "No, I've been thinking about some stuff." "What kind of stuff?" I asked, my heart sinking. There was a pause, long enough to make me anxious. "I think I need some space," she finally said. I didn't know how to respond. Space? From what? From me? From the wedding? I stumbled through my thoughts, trying to make sense of her words. "Are you feeling overwhelmed? Did I do something?" "It's not that," she said quickly. I need some time to figure things out." "Figure what out?" I pressed. "Rachel, we're supposed to be a team. If something's bothering you, I want to help." "I know," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I just can't explain it right now." And that was it. She hung up, leaving me with a hollow sense of confusion and a million unanswered questions. Over the next few days, communication between us slowed to a trickle. My texts went unread. My calls went unanswered. She stopped posting on social media altogether, which was unusual for her. Rachel loved sharing photos of sunsets, coffee shops, and quirky moments from her day-to-day life. Now, radio silence. I even reached out to her sister, hoping Lauren could shed some light on what was going on. Sorry, she replied curtly. Haven't seen her much. Hope you're okay. Her message only added to my confusion. If Rachel wasn't with her sister, then where the hell was she? By the end of the first week, I was losing sleep. I replayed every recent conversation we'd had, searching for clues I might have missed. Everything had seemed fine. We'd been laughing, planning, dreaming about our future. What could have changed so drastically in just a few days? Friends told me to give her time, but how much time was enough? A week? 2? I felt like I was living in limbo, stuck in a nightmare where the woman I loved had become a stranger overnight. The worst part was the uncertainty. If she needed space, fine. But why couldn't she just talk to me about it? Why shut me out completely? The longer the silence dragged on, the harder it became to hold on to the hope that this was just a temporary blip in our relationship. By the time the second week rolled around, I was done waiting. Something wasn't adding up, and I couldn't sit by and let my life unravel without answers. I packed an overnight bag, fueled up my car, and hit the road. Asheville wasn't close. It was a 3-hour drive. But I had plenty of time to rehearse what I'd say when I found her. I told myself I was ready for anything, but deep down, I wasn't sure. Something about all of this felt bigger than I could handle, and I had this sinking feeling my life was about to change forever. The drive to Asheville felt longer than 3 hours. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept replaying the past 2 weeks like a bad movie. Every unanswered text, every missed call, every cryptic response from Rachel had me spiraling. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe she was dealing with something she didn't know how to talk about. Maybe I'd find her at Lauren's place, and we'd have a long, overdue conversation that would clear the air. But the deeper I got into the mountains, the less certain I became. When I finally pulled into Rachel's parents' driveway, my heart was racing. Their house was a small, charming cottage on the edge of town, the kind of place that always felt warm and welcoming when we visited during the holidays. This time, it felt cold, almost unfamiliar. I parked, sat for a moment, and tried to calm my nerves. Then I stepped out of the car and knocked on the door. It took a while, but eventually, the door creaked open. Rachel stood there, her expression a mix of shock and something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Maybe? Ethan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hey, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. For a moment, we just stared at each other. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Finally, she stepped aside and gestured for me to come in. Inside, the house felt different too, stifling and awkward, not the cozy space I remembered. We sat down in the living room, and the silence was unbearable. She fidgeted with her hands, avoiding my gaze. How have you been? She asked, her tone too casual for everything that had happened. Rachel, I said, cutting through the small talk. What's going on? She sighed and looked down at her lap. I've been trying to figure some things out. I clenched my fists to keep my frustration in check. You've been trying to figure things out? For 2 weeks? Without telling me anything? Do you have any idea what that's done to me? She flinched but didn't answer right away. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said eventually. Then why did you shut me out? Why didn't you just talk to me? Rachel took a deep breath, and when she looked up, I could see the tears in her eyes. I ran into Chris. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Chris, her ex. The one she used to talk about like he was ancient history, nothing more than a lesson learned. What? I asked, my voice sharp. It wasn't planned, she said quickly. I saw him at the grocery store, and we started talking. That's all. That's all. I repeated, disbelief flooding my voice. Rachel, you've been ignoring me for weeks. This isn't just talking. She hesitated, her gaze darting away again. I needed to know if there were any unresolved feelings. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Unresolved feelings? Rachel, we're supposed to be getting married in a few months. What does he have to do with that? Her shoulders slumped. I didn't want to go into our marriage with doubts. Doubts about what? I asked, my voice rising. Doubts about me? About us? Because you didn't seem to have any when we were planning the guest list last month. She tried to speak, but I cut her off. And how exactly does spending time with your ex help you figure out your doubts? I just needed to be sure, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't want to hurt you by marrying you if... I stood up, pacing the room. If what, Rachel? If you still wanted him? She shook her head frantically. No, it wasn't like that. I swear. I just needed clarity. Clarity? I stopped and looked at her, my anger bubbling over. You ghosted me for weeks, Rachel. Weeks. I had to drive here to find out what the hell was going on, and this is what you give me. You needed clarity? Tears were streaming down her face now, but I didn't care. I'd spent too many nights staring at my phone, waiting for answers that never came. I deserved better than this. I'm sorry, she said, her voice cracking. Sorry isn't enough. I shot back. You don't just disappear on the person you're supposed to marry. That's not how this works, Rachel. I know I messed up, she said softly. I didn't know how to handle it. That's obvious, I said bitterly. The conversation went in circles after that. Every time I asked for specifics, she dodged the question, giving me vague excuses about how she needed time or didn't want to make a mistake. I felt like I was talking to a stranger, not the woman I'd planned to spend my life with. Finally, I'd had enough. I think I need some time to think, I said, throwing her own words back at her. Her eyes widened in shock. Ethan, no, I didn't mean. I held up a hand to stop her. Don't. You've had your time. Now I need mine. I grabbed my keys and walked out without looking back. The drive home was a blur. I barely remembered the road or the passing scenery. All I could think about was Rachel's face when she admitted she'd been spending time with Chris. The way her voice shook when she said she needed clarity. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt like a shell of myself. I wasn't angry in the yelling, punching walls kind of way. I was hurt. Deeply, profoundly hurt. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she'd said. Unresolved feelings. Clarity. Doubts. I didn't know what hurt more. The fact that she kept all of this from me, or the fact that I hadn't seen it coming. We'd been planning a future together, building a life. And now it felt like none of it had been real. The silence in the house was deafening, but it mirrored the silence between Rachel and me. I had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Things would never be the same. The days following my return to Nashville were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I tried to focus on work, hoping the routine would distract me, but every quiet moment brought Rachel's words crashing back. Unresolved feelings. Clarity. Doubts. Those words stuck with me, like tiny shards of glass lodged in my chest. My friends tried to help. Mike invited me out for beers, and Lindsay called every couple of days to check in, but nothing seemed to shake the weight I carried. No matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't make sense of how someone I trusted so completely could blindside me like that. Rachel didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't follow up at all. Part of me thought she might show up at my door to explain herself, or at least try to fix things. But the longer the silence stretched, the more I realized she probably wasn't going to. And maybe that was for the best. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. Had she made her choice already? Was Chris the reason she hadn't reached out? The uncertainty gnawed at me. I found myself scrolling through old photos of us on my phone, looking for any sign that this was coming, any moment when the cracks had started to form. But every picture told the same story. Two people who looked happy, who seemed like they had it all figured out. I didn't know how much longer I could live in limbo. Then, one night, as I was half-heartedly flipping through channels on TV, there was a knock at the door. My stomach twisted into a knot. For a second, I thought it might be Rachel, but when I opened the door, it was Mike. "Hey man," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "I brought beer." "You're welcome." I forced a smile. "Thanks, I guess." Mike dropped the six-pack on the counter and grabbed 2 bottles. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to do, but you've been moping for days. You need to talk to someone about this. Hell, talk to me if you have to, but don't let her screw up your whole life." I sighed, taking the beer he handed me. "I don't even know where to start." "How about with the part where she ghosted you?" he said, leaning back against the counter. Because that's not normal, man. If she couldn't even tell you what was going on, that's a red flag the size of Texas. I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Rachel wasn't a bad person. At least, I didn't think she was. But her silence, the way she'd shut me out, it didn't make sense. Mike must have seen the conflict on my face because he added, "Look, maybe she's going through something, but that doesn't excuse how she handled it. You don't deserve to be treated like that." He was right, but knowing that didn't make it hurt any less. The next day, I decided I couldn't wait anymore. I needed closure. Whether it meant fixing things with Rachel or walking away for good, I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I called her. The phone rang, and just when I thought it would go to voicemail, she picked up. "Ethan," she said, her voice hesitant. "Hey," I replied. "We need to talk." There was a pause, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "Okay, when?" "Tonight," I said. "I'll come to you if I have to." "No," she said quickly. "I'll come to Nashville. It's only fair." "Fine," I said. "What time?" 7, she replied. I hung up without saying goodbye. That evening, I sat in my living room, waiting. I didn't know what I was expecting. An apology, an explanation, maybe even a plea for forgiveness. But whatever it was, I wasn't sure if I could give her what she wanted. When the knock came at exactly 7, I opened the door to find Rachel standing there, looking nervous but determined. "Hi," she said softly. "Come in," I replied, stepping aside. She walked into the living room and stood there awkwardly, like she wasn't sure what to do. I gestured for her to sit, and she did, perching on the edge of the couch like she was ready to bolt at any second. "So," I began, sitting across from her. "Talk." She winced at my bluntness but nodded. "I know I owe you an explanation. I've been thinking about what to say, but nothing feels right." "Start with the truth," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched but pressed on. "When I went back to Asheville, I didn't plan on seeing Chris. It just happened. I ran into him at the grocery store, and we talked for a bit. I didn't think it was a big deal at first, but then we kept running into each other. And I guess I started to wonder if I still had feelings for him." Her words felt like a punch to the chest, but I kept my expression neutral. "And did you?" I asked. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice breaking. "That's why I needed time. I didn't want to marry you with doubts. I thought I owed it to both of us to figure it out before it was too late." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "And have you figured it out?" "Yes," she said quickly. "I don't want to be with Chris. I want to be with you." Her words should have brought me relief, but they didn't. All I could think about was the weeks of silence, the way she'd shut me out and left me in the dark while she sorted through her feelings. "Do you have any idea how much you hurt me?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "I've spent weeks wondering what I did wrong, wondering why the woman I love suddenly decided I wasn't enough. And now you expect me to just forget all of that because you've decided you want me after all?" Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't stop. "You don't get to do that, Rachel. You don't get to make me your backup plan." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, standing up. "I need time, just like you did." Her eyes widened in shock, but she didn't argue. I walked to the door and opened it, motioning for her to leave. "Goodbye, Rachel." She hesitated, like she wanted to say something, but then she stood up and walked out without another word. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. For the first time in weeks, the uncertainty was gone. It wasn't the closure I'd hoped for, but it was closure nonetheless. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of my house, replaying the conversation over and over in my mind. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. Things between Rachel and me could never go back to the way they were. The days after Rachel left felt strangely calm. The chaos and uncertainty that had consumed me were gone, replaced by a heavy but manageable silence. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waiting for a message, a call, or an explanation. I'd said my piece, and Rachel had walked out the door. But the calm didn't mean it was easy. Everywhere I turned, there were reminders of her. The picture of us hiking in the Smoky Mountains still sat on the mantel, A stack of wedding magazines cluttered the coffee table, untouched since the day she left for Asheville. Even the fridge mocked me with a half-empty bottle of her favorite oat milk. I spent the first couple of days cleaning the house, not because it was messy, but because I needed something, anything, to focus on. I boxed up the wedding planning materials and shoved them into the back of a closet. I moved the photo from the mantel to a drawer. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of control, however fleeting. My friends, ever the concerned cheerleaders, kept reaching out. Lindsay invited me over for dinner, and Mike dragged me to a baseball game. They were trying to help in their own way, but every time I sat down to explain what had happened, it felt like reliving the whole mess. "You need to do something for yourself," Lindsay said one night over takeout. "Get out of the house. Meet new people. Do anything but sit around thinking about her." I nodded along, but I wasn't ready for new people, new anything. I still felt like I was sifting through the wreckage of my old life, trying to figure out what was salvageable. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text from Ava. Ava was one of Rachel's friends, someone I'd always liked but never really talked to one-on-one. She was warm, easygoing, and always had a quick laugh. Her message was simple. "Hey, Ethan. I heard about what happened. Just wanted to check in and see how you're doing." I stared at the text for a long time, unsure how to respond. Was this a trap? Was she fishing for gossip to take back to Rachel? Or was she genuinely trying to be kind? After a while, I decided to take it at face value. "Hey, Ava. Thanks for reaching out. I'm doing okay, I guess." Her reply came almost instantly. "If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I've been through something similar, and I know how much it sucks." The conversation was easy, light. She didn't pry or push. She just listened, offering the occasional piece of advice or a word of encouragement. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. A few days later, Ava texted me again, suggesting we meet up for coffee. At first, I hesitated. Meeting up with one of Rachel's friends felt complicated. But Ava was persistent in a kind way, and eventually, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I expected the conversation to be awkward, but it wasn't. Ava asked about work, hobbies, even my favorite TV shows. It was the kind of normal, unforced interaction I hadn't had in weeks. "You know," she said at one point, "you deserve someone who sees your worth. Someone who doesn't need to figure out if you're the right choice." Her words hit harder than I expected. I nodded, unable to say much in response. We met up a few more times after that, coffee, lunch, the occasional walk around the park. Ava was easy to be around, but I could tell she wanted more than just friendship. She started texting more often, dropping subtle hints that she was interested. But I wasn't ready. One evening, she invited me to dinner. I showed up in jeans and a hoodie, only to find her dressed like it was a date. The conversation was fine, but the undertone was unmistakable. She laughed too hard at my jokes, leaned in a little too close. I felt bad, but I wasn't in a place to reciprocate. When I got home that night, I told myself I needed to set boundaries. Ava was a good person, and I didn't want to hurt her by giving her false hope. The next morning, I sent her a message. "Hey, Ava. I really appreciate you being there for me, but I think it's important to be clear. I'm not looking for anything beyond friendship right now." Her response came quickly. "Of course. I totally understand. No hard feelings." It seemed like she took it well, but something about the exchange left me uneasy. Then, somehow, Rachel found out. It started with a knock at my door, loud and urgent. When I opened it, Rachel was standing there, looking furious. "What the hell are you doing?" she demanded, storming past me into the living room. I shut the door, already exhausted by her theatrics. "Nice to see you too, Rachel. What do you want?" She spun around, glaring. "You've been hanging out with Ava? My friend?" I crossed my arms. "I'm sorry, but what makes you think you get to ask me about anything I'm doing?" Her face twisted in frustration. "She's my friend, Ethan. Do you know how humiliating this is for me?" I laughed, short and bitter. "Humiliating for you? Rachel, you ghosted me for weeks to sort out your feelings for your ex. You don't get to play the victim here." She looked taken aback, like she hadn't expected me to push back. "So that's it?" she asked, her voice rising. "You're just moving on?" What did you think was going to happen? I shot back. That I'd sit here waiting for you to decide if I'm good enough? I told you, Rachel, I need time. And frankly, I don't think there's anything left to fix. She stared at me, her expression a mix of anger and hurt. I came back because I realized I still love you. Too late, I said flatly. Maybe you should go back to Chris. Seems like you're good at circling back to old options. Her face went red, her jaw tightening. You don't get to stand there and act like you're better than me. If you think I'm just going to let this slide, you're wrong. Let what slide? I asked, throwing my hands up. That I'm done? That I'm over it? That's not my problem anymore, Rachel. She glared at me, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. You'll regret this, she said. Don't think I won't make you regret this. I opened the door and gestured to it. Go ahead, Rachel. Make your threats. But you're not my problem anymore. She stared at me for a moment, then stormed out. As I locked the door behind her, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't angry, sad, or confused. I was done. This time, I knew it was for good. The day Rachel stormed out of my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. It wasn't the all-encompassing, blissful kind of peace people write songs about. It was quieter, more subdued. A simple realization that I didn't owe her anything anymore. She had made her choices, and I was making mine. Still, moving on was easier said than done. Every corner of my house felt like it carried a memory of her. The couch we'd sat on during lazy Sunday mornings. The bookshelf she helped me organize, insisting on a color-coded system I thought was ridiculous, but indulged her anyway. Even the stupid kitchen clock she bought because it added character. I decided it was time to make some changes. The first thing to go was the wedding binder. I didn't bother flipping through it one last time. I just tossed it in the trash. Next, I packed up the framed photos of us that dotted the living room and stashed them in the closet. I wasn't ready to throw them away just yet, but I couldn't stand to look at them either. The house still felt too heavy, too full of her, so I went further. I rearranged the furniture, bought a new comforter, and even swapped out the curtains in the bedroom. It was a small step, but it helped. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the space was mine again. A week passed, then another. Ava texted me a couple of times, but I kept my responses polite and brief. I didn't want to send mixed signals, and I wasn't ready to dive into anything resembling a relationship. She seemed to take the hint, which I appreciated. Then, just when I thought things were finally settling down, Rachel reappeared in the strangest way. It started small. One evening, as I pulled into my driveway after work, I noticed a car parked a few houses down. It was dark, and I didn't think much of it until I saw the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Something about it felt off, but I shrugged it off as paranoia. The next day, I saw the same car parked on the other side of the street. Again, there was a figure in the driver's seat, and this time, I recognized it. It was Rachel. I didn't confront her. I wasn't even sure what I'd say. But seeing her there stirred up a mix of emotions I wasn't prepared for. Anger, sadness, confusion. They all swirled together, leaving me restless and unsettled. Over the next few days, it became a pattern. I'd catch glimpses of her at odd times. Her car parked down the street, her figure darting into another aisle at the grocery store when she thought I noticed her. She wasn't making a scene, but she wasn't exactly subtle either. It felt like she was waiting for me to do something. One evening, after spotting her car yet again, I decided I'd had enough. I didn't walk over to confront her. Instead, I sent her a text. Rachel, I've noticed you around. Stop following me. This isn't healthy, and it's not going to change anything. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But the next day, her car was gone. The days that followed were quiet, almost eerily so. I didn't see her or hear from her, and for the first time, it felt like she was truly gone. The weight I'd been carrying for weeks began to lift. In the absence of her chaos, I started focusing on myself. I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in months, started going to the gym again, and even picked up an old hobby, woodworking, that I hadn't touched since college. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. Mike and Lindsay noticed the change, too. You seem lighter, Lindsay said one evening over coffee. Like you're finally coming back to yourself. I feel lighter, I admitted. I mean, it still sucks, but I think I'm okay. Mike, ever the skeptic, smirked. You're not just saying that, are you? No, I said, laughing. I mean it. For the first time in weeks, I actually feel like I'm moving forward. Of course, moving forward didn't mean I wasn't still haunted by the past. There were nights when I'd lie awake, replaying everything Rachel had said and done. I'd wonder if I could have done something differently, if I'd missed the signs, if I was partly to blame for how things fell apart. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't about what I did or didn't do. Rachel had made her choices, and those choices said more about her than they did about me. One night, as I was scrolling through my phone, I stumbled across a photo of us from a trip we'd taken to Charleston the year before. We were sitting on a bench by the waterfront, laughing at something I couldn't even remember. I stared at the picture for a long time before finally deleting it. It wasn't an angry or bitter decision. It just felt like the right thing to do. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. By the time another week rolled around, I felt like I was finally standing on solid ground again. The house was my own. My time was my own. My life was my own. And Rachel? She was just a chapter in my past. Looking back, I realized that losing her wasn't the end of the world. It was a chance to start fresh, to rebuild my life on my own terms. And while it wasn't the future I'd planned, it was a future I could look forward to. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was truly okay. And that was enough.